And we're recording.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us today for our lunch and learn. Apologies for the technical difficulties at the beginning, but we are working behind the scenes to sort that out. So hopefully at some point we will go live to the YouTube live stream. So I'm Charmaine Connors. I'm Community Engagement Manager here at the Coders Guild. And as part of my remit, I coordinate and help to deliver the Lunch and Learn project, which is a series of 30-minute sessions delivered to you weekly via YouTube Live. And the sessions are designed to inform, inspire, and educate career-minded tech professionals who love to learn, basically. So great content that we've got coming up over the next few weeks for you guys. So I'm really excited about that. But today's session, we have a guest speaker who is our very own Ady Stokes, and he's come to speak to you guys today about software testing. So we've got a great session lined up. Just before I hand over to Ady, and just bearing in mind that we will be live at some point, I'd like to encourage you to subscribe to the YouTube, to the YouTube channel, the Coders Guild, just so you don't miss any content drops in the future. And if you're feeling the content as well, do give us a like when we get on there. And just let us know that, you know, we're on the right track with the content. It's a great way to also pay it forward to other people who might find value in this content. And it's an awesome opportunity to allow us to let our community grow. So yeah, do give us a like and a thumbs up, and do subscribe. And without further ado, over to you, Ady.
Well, thank you, Charmaine. Hello, everybody. I'll talk a little bit about myself in a moment, but today's session is called What is Testing? And it's what is software testing? But like a lot of things, the software is silent. So testers don't speak about software testing, they just talk about testing. So it's the shortest session today. It should be around 30 minutes, and then we'll have time for Q&A afterwards. But if at any point further down the line you have a question on testing that you want to ask, you can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn, and I'll share those details later. So the course provider, today's session is hosted by the Coders Guild, the UK's most innovative, industry-led, community-driven tech education hub. I think they deliberately make that sentence hard to say just to test us, people who do presentations. So I said I'd talk a little bit about myself. I've been in software testing, and previous to that I was an auditor for the last 25 years. I've done international speaking on testing and accessibility. I'm also an accessibility specialist and test engineer at my company Glean. I have my own website at thebigtesttheory.com. I'm not trying to bait you to go there for the clicks. There's no advertisement on there. It's all hosted for free. And as I say, you can reach me on Twitter as Ali Ady, and the Ali is A11Y, and that stands for accessibility because there are 11 letters between the A and Y in accessibility. I have no tech background before I got into tech. My previous jobs were a wagon driver, running a warehouse, driving forklift trucks, and I got into software testing almost accidentally when I was working for a company and they wanted me to do some user acceptance testing. And I just found it really interesting, and that piqued my interest in testing in general. I learned what I could about it and then eventually got a job. So you don't have to have the highest education or the greatest technical knowledge, just be fairly comfortable with the computer and practice software testing. So the learning outcomes for today, or the takeaways, I'll explain what testing is, and more importantly, what it isn't. Understand how testing adds value to software development. Have awareness of the wide range of activities covered by testing, and learn that testing can begin at the same time as an idea is conceived. So I'll do that by, after this introduction, telling you what testing isn't, why it's important, how the different roles of a developer and tester work together, go through the different types of testing, talk a little bit about why testers deal a lot with assumptions and ambiguity, and then some of the different testing careers that are out there. So I'm the concept creator and the lead trainer for the Coders Guild's software testing courses. We do skills courses and teach apprentices. And at the start of those courses, I always tell them the two most common words you will hear throughout this whole course is, it depends. And the reason for that is that software testing is very context dependent. There are lots of things that testers can look at, can think about, and can do, but the actual circumstances in which they do them determine what's appropriate and what will work in any given situation. So as testers, our job is to identify risks to products. Obviously, we want it to work as it expected, but it's as much to ensure that it can handle the unexpected is what testers do. So that's why, like I say, we always say context is king in software testing. So as human beings, we very much like simple answers to very, very complicated questions. So over the years, quite a few people, including myself, have tried to sort of summarize what testing is in 1 or 2 sentences. So I'm going to go through a few of those now. No, I'm not. Sorry, I'll get to that in a minute. So look, lots of different people have opinions about what software testing is. This meme's been around for quite a few years, and it gives a few examples of my friends think I just play with stuff for a living. My wife even called my job a pretend job at one point. Now, I must point out, I wasn't overly offended with that, and we have been married for, well, it's going to be 32 years this year. So we're still friends. Society thinks everybody who does software testing is actually hacking it, and that's not true in the sense of we're hacking software to do damage to it, but we do look under the hood of software and look at technical things. There's an old myth that developers think all we do is break their software, and that's not quite true either. Everybody who's a tester thinks they're a superhero finding bugs, but what we actually do is we get paid to think. We get paid to think widely and deeply about the software and all the things that could affect it. So let's have a look at some of those quotes I mentioned. A tester thinks about what could happen given every possible practical scenario. So for every risk that we have or that we identify, we have to look at the likelihood or the frequency of it occurring and the impact of what that risk might have. So if we have something that's almost unlikely ever to happen, but the impact of it would take our whole software down, we probably want to do something about that just for that time when something goes wrong. If it's highly likely to happen, but the impact is very minimal, like it slows software down so it takes a second or two to respond, we might be less interested in addressing that because it's only a very small, even though it can happen often, it's only a very small impact. So when we talk about risks, we're also thinking about the impacts that those risks can have and the frequency in which it's happened. So that's why the word practical is in there. So thinking about all the different things that could happen to software sounds like it's an almost impossible concept because there's so many different types of software out there, so many different types of apps, operating systems, devices, ways for data to travel over the internet through mobile data, 4G, 5G. There's so many different combinations. So putting those risks in order and thinking about what are the most important ones to focus on helps us get to the riskiest things first, the things that can do the most damage. So that's what we mean there, or that's what I mean there by giving every possible practical scenario. Because it's quite possible things will happen, but it's impractical. We don't know who to accredit this one to. The principal objective of software testing is to give confidence in the software. Now, to a certain extent, that's true. But there are also many times confidence wouldn't be enough before we want to release something to live. So anywhere where human life could be affected by software, so think of medical equipment that automatically doses patients, aviation, self-driving vehicles, we probably wouldn't want to go with, oh yeah, it's fine to release, I'm very confident in it. We'd probably want some empirical evidence that that software is going to work as expected in all cases. That's why there's no self-driving cars at the moment, because there are still too many scenarios where the self-driving car just does not recognise the situation, such as following a car, it's ready to brake if that car brakes, but if that car changes lane to overtake a static vehicle, a self-driving car very often doesn't recognise the static vehicle and drives straight into it. So confidence isn't always the best barometer to think about. Now, this is my favourite by James Back. He's quite famous in the software testing community, has been around and doing it since the 90s. And he said, testing is an infinite process of comparing the invisible to the ambiguous in order to avoid the unthinkable happening to the anonymous. And it's important to think about the words that are underlined in this sentence. So we can't test everything. That's why testing is an infinite process. There are too many variables, there are too many types of software, there are too many software combinations. You think about how many apps you have on your phone. There are hundreds and hundreds of different combinations, including all the background software and all the permissions we've given. We can't test everything, so it's important to focus on the risks. Comparing the invisible. So, in creating software, we have things called requirements, and those requirements tell us what the software is supposed to do. But there are always undefined requirements. Generally, we want software to work easily and quickly. Now, defining what the word easily means or the word quickly means is really hard. So we don't generally write that down. But as testers, we know when something's operating too slowly, and we know when things are frustrating to use. So we feed that information back, even though it's not a defined requirement. The ambiguous, I'll talk a little bit about ambiguity towards the end. But software requirements can often be ambiguous. I mentioned two there, easy and quickly. The words can mean multiple things to multiple people. 10 people can read a sentence and take 10 variations away from what that sentence means. In order to avoid the unthinkable, so software can have real impacts on people when it doesn't do its job. Not that long ago, nearly 2 million people were affected by the TSB bank outage that happened in April 2018. They had a massive software upgrade of their back end. They tried to transfer all the accounts across. And when the system went live, it collapsed almost immediately. And happening to the anonymous, that's us. We're the anonymous. When we make software, unless we think about who's going to use it at the end, we could not think about the consequences of what goes wrong. So to me, it's important for testers to also have empathy and think about lots of different end users. This is one of the reasons why I decided to specialise in accessibility, because I believe everybody, no matter how you interact with software, should be able to use it. Hopefully, in a future Lunch and Learn, I'm going to do a session on accessibility and talk about that in a little bit more detail. So at the simplest level, software is risk mitigation. It's fairly easy to think of software risks. You hear about data breaches on a regular basis, but hacking software is only one of the main risks that we need to be considered. If you have a banking app, being able to access it is probably the highest risk that we need. People need access to the money, they need to be able to pay the bills, they need to be able to withdraw it to buy food or whatever it might be. Keeping that system up and running and stable is probably the most important risk there. There's lots of different risks. People's attention spans are shorter than they've ever been. So trying to keep people's attention is really hard. And software that takes a long time for a page to load or to do an action, you're just going to give up on it. The amount of people I know who download an app and delete it within 5 minutes, those figures in across lots of different applications are really, really high. So, as I said, risk mitigation is at the heart of software testing. Now, this is an example of a login page. This is actually a real life example from a system where my daughter worked. She started interacting with it, sent me a couple of pictures and said, "You'd have a field day with this, Dad." But the reason I've got the image here is that you may hear the term shift left associated with software testing. And what that means is, as software testers, we can actually test from the moment an idea is formed. If somebody tells us an idea for software, we can start testing at that point and start asking questions. So in this example, it could be a design or a wireframe, as we call it, for what software might look like before a line of code has even been written. And we can examine this closely, we can ask questions, and we can give our observations. Now, looking at this, there's login and login. So there's login with a space between them and login without a space between them. So we have an inconsistency already at the start. Some of the ones on the page are capitalized and some others. So that's more inconsistency. The placeholders of login and password, they're very low contrast. So people with reduced sight might struggle to see them. I believe there are 5 different fonts on this piece of software. Again, that's massive inconsistency and no real reason for it. And the top 2 ask us to log in 2 different ways, but the bottom says sign me I. Now, I'm assuming that that's just a bad fit and it's supposed to be sign me in, or it could be a spelling error and the I's gone. But again, we have more inconsistency. And do we really need recapture on there? And if we do, why is that box a bit bigger than the other box? So there's so many questions just from this one little form, and so much feedback that as software testers we can give to the people who are making the design. I quite often, where I work, sit with designers in how might we sessions where we're talking about new processes and things, and they will have some designs and wireframes, and we'll walk through them, and we'll not only think about the risks to it and what might happen in certain situations, but we'll talk about it from different users' perspectives. So we'll say, well, how would that work if you're only using a keyboard, or how would that work if you're using a screen reader, and different things like that. So software testers getting involved as early in the process as possible can save time and money, because the earlier we identify potential problems, the easier they are to fix. There's no software here, this is all pure observation, but you can see that we've raised lots of different points just from thinking about it before we've created software. There was a myth for a long time before it was disproven that the brain had 2 specific sides. One was more creative and one was more logical, and you were either one-sided or the other. That's been massively disproved. But using that principle, I do like to say that testing is like a 2 sides of the brain activity, because we have to be creative in thinking about all the risks to the products and all the tests or experiments we want to do with software to find where it might fall down or not behave as expected. But then when we execute those tests, we have to be very logical in sifting through the results and analysing them. And if we do find something, we have to be very logical in writing the order of the steps that took to create that and make sure that it's very repeatable. So I like to call it a 2 sides of the brain activity. It's one of the reasons why I think it's one of the best jobs in the world and why I love testing so much, is that I get to be as creative as I want and I get to be as analytical as I want, and I like doing both of those activities. So if I was only doing one of those activities, I wouldn't be as happy in my work. But because we are thought workers, we have to think a lot. We can use things to help us. And I'm going to talk a little bit now about heuristics and mnemonics. So, heuristics and mnemonics are both what we call mental shortcuts or prompts to help us remember things. Now, you may not be familiar with those words, but I bet you're familiar with how they're used, and I bet you even have some that you use yourself. So, given them their proper definitions, heuristics are principles which reduce the complex task of assessing probabilities and predicting values to simpler judgmental options. And for mnemonics, there are systems such as a pattern of letters, ideas, or associations which assists in remembering something. So I've got a couple of examples on the screen. When people see the word Goldilocks, they think about the fairy tale Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And one of the key threads through that is having something that's either too small, too big, or just right, or too hot, or too cold, or just right. And that principle goes through as Goldilocks goes through the house and looks at the different things all the way to the bedroom before the bears find her. Now, in software testing, we can use that as a heuristic to think about if we're inputting data. So let's say we're inputting a password, and the rules for that password are it has to be between 6 and, let's say, 15 characters long. Goldilocks tells us that if we enter a password that's shorter than 6, longer than 15, or one in between, we're covering 3 different test scenarios. So something that's too small, something that's too big, and something that's just right. So that's how heuristics work. And there are heuristic cheat sheets out there that have lots of different things. There's one that's about 15 years old, and there is a new one that the Ministry of Testing have published over the last couple of years, that basically the whole community came together to put things onto this new heuristic cheat sheet. It even has some of my stuff on there. So mnemonics are quite often acronyms or a collection of words to help you remember something or remember a pattern. Now, in this case, CRUD is quite often used when we're testing databases. So when you enter something on a form, it goes off and it's usually written into some form of database. And a database has rows of information. Now, as we write to a database, we're creating a new entry into it when we click submit on that form. If we decide to change that information, we're updating it. If somebody who you submitted it to wants to look at that information, they have to be able to read it. And due to things like GDPR and data protection and stuff like that, at some point it needs to be able to be deleted. So CRUD is create, read, update, and delete. And that mnemonic helps us make sure we've tested all the things to do with databases. Now, I said you've probably heard of them. The very first mnemonic that I ever heard was by my mum. So she had two pairs of marigold gloves. Other gloves are available, but she had 2 pairs of marigold gloves. One was pink and one was blue. And she always told me it was pink for the sink and blue for the loo. When I was at school, we remembered the order of the planets by saying my very eager mother just served us 9 pizzas. And the first letter of that sentence, the words in that sentence, relate to the planets. So my is Mercury, V is Venus, and so on. Obviously, that's before one of them got demoted. But there's lots of them out there. I'm sure you've got your own. If you didn't know before, now you've got a word to put to them. But it doesn't really matter. As long as you've got a mental shortcut that can help you, that's great. Now, this little meme is a play on another quote, which is accredited to Kane, Back and Petticord. Again, they were 3 testers in the 90s in Silicon Valley. And they came up collectively with the quote, testers don't like to break things, they like to dispel the illusions that things work. Now, in modern parlance, I always use the Bart Simpson defense. It was like that when I got there. All I've done is interacted with the software. If it breaks, it was like that when I got there. I've just exposed the fact that if we do certain things, that software might break. There's also a bit of a myth that software testers like breaking things. It's partially true. I would say I don't enjoy it when software breaks when I'm testing it, but I think it's good that I've found that problem so that we can address it, make it better, and that in turn will improve the quality of it. So talking about quality is very subjective, and a lot of test roles are called quality assurance. Now, personally, I don't really like that term because the origin of quality assurance comes from manufacturing. So if you're making a product to very specific specifications, you can take that product, you can measure it against the predefined specifications, and that will tell you whether it meets that quality or not. And the people who were doing that role were called quality assurance. Now, I can't assure the quality of software. There are too many different types of people who might use it in too many different circumstances. All I can do is my best. So I can assess quality. I can even advocate for quality, but I can't really assure quality. So it's impossible to test everything, and it's impossible to assure that software works for every person in every situation. But we can do our best. So I'd rather be a quality advocate and assess quality, but I definitely can't assure it. So testing's really important because no matter how simple you make something, someone will always use it differently to their way intended. There's a saying in software testing, if someone says that'll never happen, it'll probably occur next Tuesday. If something can happen, it probably will at some point. So as testers, if we can expose all those things that might happen and find out what damage that might do, we might find it's benign or we might find it's really impactful. But that's the value of having someone come along and critique software that somebody else has created. So not so long ago, I clicked on an article on Twitter about accessibility by a company called Equidox. And when I opened it, this is the image that I got. Duplicated menus, images, the automated PDF conversion part, but not the Bionics, which was quite weird. I thought that wasn't duplicated. Maybe it's hidden behind something above it. I don't know. But, oh no, it is there, sorry. I always miss it. But it was really interesting because I have multiple devices. I opened Twitter on another phone, which was fine. And I even went to the website and opened it there, and that was fine. And I narrowed it down to the fact that I was on an iPhone 8 and my screen was smaller than all the other devices that I'd had. So I gave some feedback to them. I sent them that picture, and they found out that the breakpoint in the software, and a breakpoint is where you change sizes in responsive design for different sizes of screens that might be displayed on. Their last breakpoint didn't consider anything under a certain thing, and that was my iPhone 8 was under their minimum level. And it only took them a few days to fix it, which was quite cool. But there's so many different browsers and operating systems out there, it's hard to test everything. So many devices nowadays. So many different manufacturers doing things in their own way. So I talked about the TSB bank and their software failing. Interestingly, it cost them over 330 million in customer compensation. They lost thousands and thousands of customers. And that failed IT project had, it turned out, over 2,000 known issues when it was released into live. Apparently it was someone in the boardroom who said, no, it has to go live. But that's not the only time. In 2020, TSB were in the news again because users were left with a screen showing unexpected error. Large impacts caused by software happen more often than you think. And it's not a recent thing either, although it's more likely to occur today because software is everywhere. It's in every bit of our lives now. We can't even go to fridges nowadays without having a bit of software stuck to the side of it. Sometimes I think the Internet of Things is as bad as it is good. It's nice in some ways. I have a Google Hub in my kitchen, and it can play the radio, and it works like a moving picture frame because it displays all our pictures we've got saved. So that's really nice. But devices listening to every word you say just feels a bit weird to me. Anyway, as I said, it's not a recent thing because in 1983, the Soviet, when it was still Russia as a whole entity, the Soviet early warning system falsely indicated that the US had launched 5 missiles at Russia. Now, it was purely thanks to one duty officer decided that if the US was really attacking, they would send more than 5 missiles. So he reported it as a false alarm and a fake reading. Now, it could have gone the other way and life would have been very different today. But you can see how one small thing can have a big impact. Now, a bit closer to home, 2019, Heathrow was plunged into chaos. Their baggage system went down. Planes took off with no luggage for the people going on a holiday. Delayed passengers couldn't check in because the baggage things just weren't working. Everything was stuck. And that was the second time in 5 weeks it happened. And they were both related back to the same problem, and it was to do with dates. And it was because nobody had tested that February the 29th worked. Really simple test, quite an obvious risk if you've got a system with dates, using dates. Checking February the 29th. No, they didn't bother, all went for it. And even more recently, the end of last year, Facebook, Instagram and WhatsApp went down. The whole world was talking about it. It was on the headlines of the news because people couldn't post pictures of themselves. Oh, my word, the world's coming to an end. But it was down for hours. And it was one person's, and I'm not going to use the word fault because it wasn't their fault, but it was one person's actions that caused all that outage. It was somebody who used their services in the background and they just put a combination of settings that led to a cascade effect. Now, as it happens, that potential risk had been identified, but they said, oh, it'll never happen because nobody's ever going to use that combinations of settings. And next Tuesday, there it was, everything was down. Cascade effect took hours to come back up. I'm just conscious of time that we started late and I'm trying not to run over. So this is a massive simplification of the roles of a developer and a tester. And it's not actually like that. It's more fuzzy lines and it depends on the individuals. But the focus of a developer is to create things. And when you're making something, you're invested in making it to do what it's supposed to do. A tester comes along as a critic. Now, because all that focus has been done on what it's supposed to do, we can assess that fairly quickly. So we're more interested in the things that it might happen to it. Now, it's quite often called negative or positive testing. And you might hear the terms happy and sad path. So the sad path is it doing things it's not supposed to do. And the happy path is it doing things it's supposed to do. But I've worked in teams where these two roles are very, very much 50-50. And the developer's thinking about testing just as much as the tester thinks about testing. So again, the situation depends. And if you're in separate teams, rather than working together, this can be more likely. So how many different types of testing are there? It's going to be quite hard for you to see all this, depending on your size of screen, especially if you're on a phone. But I gathered this periodic table of testing together. It took me over 6 years from the beginning when I wanted to find out what was out there in the testing universe. It took me 6 years to put all this together. So I broke it down into testing, technical, personal, and techniques. These are all things that testers might come across. I've come across, I'm going to say 80% of these over my 20-year testing career. But people have used this to map out learning plans, to scope projects. There's lots of different ways. And if you're interested in this, then the latest version's on my website. I also said I would talk a little bit about assumptions and ambiguity. Now, everybody's going to look at Mary had a little lamb and think of the nursery rhyme, its fleece was white as snow. But just if I asked you, what does that mean? I bet as many people are on this call would come away with something different. So Mary had a little lamb. That means she doesn't anymore. Why doesn't she? Maybe she had a little lamb and it grew up and now she has a sheep. Mary, she had a nice piece of rack of lamb for a tea. Maybe Mary isn't even a human being. If Mary was a sheep, she would give birth to a little lamb. So words are the worst way of communicating, and they all need context. So this is why we're always looking for ambiguity in requirements and things like that. So I said I'd talk about, I think we're finally being live streamed. I've just had a notification pop up on my screen. Finally, I said I'd talk about testing careers and all the different types there are. So the top group are standard software testing roles. So quality assurance, test engineer, quality engineer or analyst. You get different specializations like a test architect, an accessibility specialist like myself, performance engineers or security testers. More recently, you're getting people who specialize in API testing, which is quite interesting. There's some test management roles there. And then we have automation specific roles. I have no idea what a manual automation tester is. I read the job description, that didn't shine a light on it. It's a very strange combination of words. But that is a role that's out there. So hopefully I've explained very quickly what testing is and isn't. Hopefully you understand a little bit about how it adds value. You've got a bit of awareness about a wide range of activities that we cover, and you've learned that testing can begin when an idea begins. So, question time. I saw there was one in the chat. Oh, which was you saying add questions in the chat. Okay. So if anybody wants to come off mute and ask me any questions, I believe we've got a bit of time left.
Can you explain a bit more about testing architect, the role?
Yeah, it's a fairly newer role, and it's one that some companies are using to think about all their testing systems and how they mirror the live systems. So a test architect can work out, well, we can't use this bit of the live system because it's too secure or it would cause too many problems. So a test architect might come up with a way of making a fake version of that area of the system. We use the terms mock, fake, and stubs as ways of where a system, what you need it to give you a response, but you can't get it from the real life system because it's too risky, it's too dangerous, it might cause data leaks. There's all sorts of reasons. I'll give an example. Card companies, payment card, credit card, debit card, all those sorts of things, they all have versions of test cards that testers can use to test payment systems without actually using real cards and real money and all that sort of thing. So you have a test card number, and when the payment system, you use the real life payment system, but when it gets to the other end, it goes, oh, that's a fake card, I'll send it to this little mock service. And depending on the expiry date you put on that card, it will return a response that's predetermined. So it might say payment accepted, it might say payment declined, it might say the card's expired. So there's lots of different fake responses that you can get back, but your system would look like it's received a real response from a real payment system. So that's an example of a fake, and those are things that test architects can do. They can also work out the gaps between the live and the test system and where we need to either create or duplicate different things. So there's lots of things a test architect can do from a technical sense to make sure that the environments that software testers use are as close to live as possible without actually being live, because that would be, again, a risk. Does that help?
I think I understood most of that, but yeah, it did help. Thank you very much.
Any more?
I've had a question, Ady. So I have one of my own as well, but I'll go with one that was messaged to me directly, and it was just to say, okay, I'm quite interested, in testing. What would be, and kind of finding more about it, and maybe having a go. What would be the natural next steps, would you say, that you'd recommend for somebody getting started?
So the Ministry of Testing have a free account that you can create, and you get access to some courses, a lot of articles, a lot of information. They have a free, what's called the Ministry of Testing Club, and that's like a discussion portal where you can literally ask a question. And I think the membership's like well over 15,000 now, but 15,000 testers from around the world could see your question and try and answer it. You see some threads are really active, some threads are quite quiet. They're very good at creating a community around a business, the Ministry of Testing. So follow them on Twitter. They like asking questions about testing. You see nice conversations going on. But Ministry of Testing there's lots of articles like a list of things that new testers need to know and stuff like that. So they if you're starting your journey, they also have what's called an essentials path. And the essentials is taking someone who knows nothing about software testing and walking them through all the way from awareness to start testing. They have their own sites where you can go and practice testing. They're linked to places where you can your set little problems, like an input field, and you have to find 18 things, 18 different inputs to put in it. So I would start with the Ministry of Testing. And if you qualify, you might be able to go on a Coders Guild skills bootcamp or skills course.
Sounds like a plan. Yeah, thanks, Ady. No, that would be incredibly helpful. I think, yeah, it's always great to kind of have that immersion, have that network, and I think the main thing, the main helpful point is kind of bouncing those ideas or those questions off somebody who's, you know, an expert in the field or definitely got some skin in the game. So that's really helpful. Thank you. I did have one question. I really related to what you were saying before about the enjoyment that you get, you know, from using all of your brain, using your creative side, your logical side. Definitely relate to that. Would you say that's the most enjoyable part of your job, or the most satisfying part, or is there something else that you'd say, yeah, you know, I really like that about my job?
Well, yeah, I do really like that about my job. I like interacting with people, and because I've been around so long, I really like paying back. So doing things like this, raising awareness of testing accessibility and all those sorts of things. Before I became a trainer with the Coders Guild, I've probably mentored maybe 40 or 50 people over my software career. I've taken people who knew nothing about software, and they're senior test managers now. So I mentor quite a lot of people, but giving back and the test community. So anybody asking questions in the test community, if I can help in any way, I try to. But I enjoy my role very much, but I probably equally enjoy the stuff outside my role, like helping people in the test community. I've made some absolutely wonderful friends throughout the world through testing and talking and the Ministry of Testing, getting involved with the stuff they do. So it's great. I have books on my shelves from authors I now chat to on a regular basis, and I consider friends, and we exchange cards at Christmas and stuff like that. And like, I would never have thought when I started software testing that I'd ever like meet people who write books and chat with them and get treated as an equal. It's weird. It still stuns me. I sort of fanboy every time like Lisa Crispin likes one of my tweets. It's odd.
Oh, thank you. No, I totally
don't get me started. Don't get me started with Andy Jones either. I got to speak to Andy Jones at a test conference down in Brighton, and it was the very first time I read one of my testing poems in public. And I was sat at the same table, and she leant over and said, "Good job," which was like I nearly freaked out. It was it.
Oh, that's really cool. That's so cool. It's great when you can have those moments, you know, in your job. And I get that, yeah, the whole giving back and kind of paying forward what you've learned and, you know, helping to inspire and educate really the next wave. So yeah, awesome. So it seems like testing keeps you pretty busy, Ady. So we do appreciate you coming to deliver for us today. It's been a really good session.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say it's one of the reasons why I resonated so closely with the Coders Guild, because their mission is to make tech more diverse. Yeah. And like I think we've done nearly 10 skills courses now, and over all of those courses, there've been 50% people who identify as women and 50% BAME. So it's great that we're really growing the diversity, and well over 60% of those people now have their first job in tech. So that's just so brilliant to see people growing.
That's awesome. Yeah, making it accessible, making it inclusive, diverse. Yeah, all about that. And obviously the Coders Guild as well, which, yeah, I relate to that as well. That's what attracted me to the brand, you know, and the team as well. So yeah, you know, we all want to make that positive difference and make tech accessible for all, really, and inclusive as possible. So
really good to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, no, great session. Really good session. Thanks, Ady. Appreciate your time.
And
of course, thanks everybody for coming as well. Hope you enjoyed today's session and took something from it. As Ady said, he is available on Slack and also on LinkedIn. So you can reach out to him if you have any follow-up questions from the session. And obviously I'm available as well. So do reach out if you want to. But yeah, we'll wrap up today's session. As I said, thank you for coming. We will be back next week with more Lunch and Learn. So keep your eyes peeled for the communications going out about that. And just to remind you to subscribe to the YouTube channel. And also, if you was liking today's content, do give us a thumbs up. And we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot, guys. See you later.
Thank you.